Like I said, is that convoluted? Yes. Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with a cold, Rye Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's. Hold on. I think I can do that better. I think I can talk here relatively normally. I can talk here without... No, that'll strain my throat. We'll go here. All right, you're just going to have to deal with this. So, bit of a pickle I'm in. I need to record 2 podcasts within this week because next week I'm on vacation. I've already recorded the main channel video for this week, and I can wait to record the main channel video and the podcast for next week until later this week when I'm hopefully feeling better. But I've run up against the clock, as it were, and I've been sick since Friday. Typically, I record these on Sunday, edit them on Monday, release them on Tuesday. It is Monday night at 11 p.m. I've waited as long as I can. I still sound like this, and my throat still hurts. So hopefully this is listenable. If this is one of the less listened to podcasts, I understand. But I'm going to get real close and real bassy. So hopefully y'all can maybe just relax to this podcast. But sleeping and dreams are actually quite thematic for today's episode because I'm actually covering FNAF 4. I think I'll make a video on it in particular rather soon. No, I think I already have in my Michael video, but I haven't really talked about FNAF 4 at length in a while. This is actually inspired from an email I got from Arthur, who essentially, I can boil down their email to, what are your thoughts on FNAF 4? What do you think is going on? So thinking about it, I thought maybe this would be a good time to go over all the plausible theories I can think of for FNAF 4, and then go into what I believe about it. So this is the big FNAF 4 episode. I'm gonna get real, maybe I just get real close to the microphone, and I'm just gonna be real bassy for you guys. Hopefully this is not an assault on the ears. I tried to wait as long as possible, but my throat only got worse. Lo and behold, I just should consider myself thankful that my half-hour long video this week has already been recorded, because that was an hour-long recording session, and I needed much higher energy for a video versus a podcast. Podcasts can be laid back. This is how we lay back, So FNAF 4, if we're talking about the kinds of theories that explain what FNAF 4 is, I think 2 come to mind in the modern day, that being dream theory and gas theory. We'll start with dream theory, as I feel like it's what most people are accustomed to thinking about with FNAF 4. So the idea of FNAF 4, it's literally all nightmares. I mean, they're called nightmare animatronics. That makes a lot of sense. Not to mention how weird everything is. The fact that there are these gargantuan, misshapen animatronics in our home. That's really strange. And it lines up well since all the internight minigames are during the day when we're playing as a small child. So FNAF 4 being the nightmares of a small child makes a lot of sense. But something we have to contend with Dream Theory is that if FNAF 4 is just nightmares, who's having them? The first answer that comes to mind is definitely the crying child, or the youngest Afton, the one we're playing as during the day. He's definitely afraid of the animatronics enough for these nightmares to make sense. Furthermore, the character encyclopedia is pretty explicit that FNAF 4 is us seeing the nightmares of the crying child who had a traumatic experience with the Freddy Fazbear animatronics. And I mean, it makes the most sense on the surface. Like I mentioned, these nightmares being of a small child who is afraid of animatronics lines up incredibly well. It's 4 minutes in, and I can feel myself draining. It's weird. I didn't have this bad. What if I put... Okay, I'm going to try to put a little bit more pressure on my voice. I was hoping this would be more comfortable, but it's not. So what if I... The crying child makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think I can maintain this for at least 45 minutes. Hopefully I didn't give the wrong impression for the... It gets better. Hey, I'll make this the cold open. The voice, I think, gets better. So just stick with it for a couple minutes. That'll be the cold open, I guess, 4 minutes in. Yeah, on the surface, the crying child makes the most sense, right? Because it just lines up really well. Not to mention the things in the bedroom line up with what we can imagine happens to the crying child. We see him get bit, and he likely gets sent to a hospital because in the FNAF 4 bedroom, we see IV bags, medicine, flowers, things that are reminiscent of a hospital bed. So everything lines up there. Why is that not just the answer? Well, there are some issues. For one, Michael has seen Nightmare Fredbear. I actually have it on the side from recording last week. There's the question, do you have dreams? And in red ink, Mike's ink, is a drawing of Nightmare Fredbear, right? So Michael has seen Nightmare Fredbear. So that's one issue. The second issue, during the gameplay of FNAF 4, you can hear the FNAF 1 phone call backwards. So whoever is having this nightmare theoretically would have had to have heard the FNAF 1 phone calls. Okay, turns out the voice doesn't get better. I just had a coughing fit, so we're going to be here. And finally, the layout of FNAF 4 is identical to FNAF 1, with Foxy running in on you, Chica approaching from the right, Bonnie approaching from the left, and Freddy doing his own thing, right? So the idea that, like, FNAF 4 lines up with FNAF 1 so well, and we are pretty certain that Michael Afton is the one who was doing FNAF 1. So then the question becomes, okay, are these nightmares then from Michael's point of view? Well, we have to think about that too. Like we mentioned, it lines up with FNAF 1 incredibly well. But that's not all. In the movies, Mike Schmidt, but I'm sure he is meant to be a parallel for Michael Afton in some way. He's sleeping on the job and he's having these dreams, and a big part of Mike Schmidt's character is that he's forcing these dreams to happen. So, I mean, that's a great nod in the direction that Michael Afton is someone who has a lot of dreams, or albeit nightmares. Not to mention, these nightmares would be fueled by guilt, in the sense that he did lead to the death of his younger brother, right, with the bite of 83. Or I say bite of 83 fairly confidently. We're not sure if the crying child was bit in 1983. I think it's much more likely that Freddy and Friends 83 is meant to say that Freddy Fazbear's opened in 1983, especially since I believe that lines up with the coins we now have. Unless that's 1985. Let me double check that. No, I checked. It's 1983. So the fact that, like, the coins say 1983, Freddy and Friends 1983, I think it's less likely that the bite... It still could have happened in 83, but I think it's more likely that that's telling us when Freddy Fazbear's was established, right? But regardless, Michael Afton and his friends led to the death of the crying child. Sure, he maybe didn't die during that bite, but he eventually dies from those injuries later on. And this all feels like a shoo-in, but then the issue arises. The character encyclopedia, in no small terms, says that these nightmares are from the crying child. So, I mean, like, do we then say, well, the character encyclopedia is often inaccurate? Sure, but not so inaccurate that something it repeats several times would be wrong, right? In the opening, when they're explaining the locations, they say this. On the crying child's page, they say this. For some of the nightmare animatronics, they say, like, it says it over and over and over again. It's insisting. So I think that's worthwhile to keep in mind that these nightmares are of the crying child. So if you're just a believer in dream theory, I think it has to be the crying child. And then you have to find a way to explain why then the crying child knows so much about the FNAF 1 location. Especially those phone calls. That's a big hitch there. Is that one of those things where maybe at the time when FNAF 4 was originally intended to be, when FNAF 4 was originally released, was Scott intending the entire series to be dreams of some kid. Therefore, ergo, explaining the references to FNAF 1. I think that's a really, really viable explanation. However, at least as of Sister Location, you can't really go with the fact that FNAF 1 through 4 are all dreams. Sister Location seems to physically solidify FNAF 4. So I think at one point, FNAF 4 was meant to say the whole series was dreams. But I think since Sister Location, that has changed. And especially with a book like Dittophobia, we now have a new interpretation for FNAF 4, that being gas theory. Need a fucking cough drop. Jesus Christ. Cough drop has been retrieved. So gas theory. In Dittophobia, we get a story from a kid named Rory, and he is experiencing pretty much verbatim the FNAF 4 nightmares every single night. And his daytime is he wakes up and he gets ready for school. He goes to take a shower, but his mom is in the shower. He goes to eat something out of the fridge, and he eats a small breakfast. And then he goes to leave for school, but he realizes he doesn't have his backpack. So then he goes to ask his mom, but she's still in the shower. Then he wanders around for a bit, and then he's really tired, so he goes to lay down again. And then he has the nightmares again. And this goes on for a while until... Oh, shoot. What was the ending of this? I just checked. It literally just happens. Like, he's walking through the house one day, and the noises of gears kind of stop. And everything's silent, and he's like, that's weird. He goes to bed. He doesn't have nightmares that night, and he wakes up, and everything's different. His normal house that he's used to is now this dingy, rundown, incredibly dirty metal facade of a house. And he notices he's not 7, but in fact 17. He's been here for 10 years. And the more he investigates, the more he learns that there are animatronics, well, more accurately, mannequins on tracks that are set to come towards his bed and they're like, they've got some affects to them, but they're a pale imitation of what he saw every night. These were placeholders in a sense. So he explores further and then finds that in the fridge, what he's been eating are these dense nutrient bars that just like have all of his nutrients but have no flavor or structure to them. And he finds that these bars were loaded into a fridge that goes further back. So he pulls them out and climbs through, finding that he's in a testing facility. Reading the paperwork, it seems that someone was using hallucinogenic gas to experiment on humans, specifically to find out what would happen if a human experienced nothing but pure terror all the time. Like nothing but pure fearful nightmares with no break. And they were doing that by using the hallucinogenic gas and then giving them something to hallucinate, these mannequins. Exploring further, Rory finds out that he is in the Sister Location bunker. Now, he doesn't know this, but he keeps describing things that are in the Sister Location bunker, like animatronics and a stage and things like that. He eventually finds maybe a way out, but needs help. So he contacts like a friend on a walkie-talkie. And then he goes back into the testing chamber to find any other clues. And when he does, a voice calls out to him saying like, hey, it's better in here. You didn't belong out there. Remember that you ran away? Here, you're safe and you're taken care of. You know that. Go fix the machine and go back to bed. And reluctantly, Rory does that. He turns the hallucinogenic gas back on, and he goes back to bed. And we, the reader, find out this voice was a tape recorder that then restarts itself in case Rory strays too far again. This is one of the more horrific Tales from the Pizzaplex stories, in my opinion, because it's just this poor 7-year-old kid that will forever be trapped in the worst thing ever, and he's keeping himself there because of how autonomous it is. Like, no one's experimenting on him anymore. He's just stuck there. That's horrific. But that raises a great point. This is saying, in this book at least, that there are testing chambers that look like the FNAF 4 nightmares connected to the Sister Location bunker. Go back to sister location, what do we see on the fuse map? But rooms that are spaced out identically to the FNAF 4 game that we've played. So this raises a lot of questions. Does that mean that FNAF 4 is in fact experiments that we're playing through and not nightmares? And if so, then who's the subject? Some people put their money on Rory, the character from the book. I think that's less likely. Maybe after the fact, a kid got stuck in there, but it seems weird to me that FNAF 4 this whole time was a kid we've just never heard of and never got any information on. Now, some people also were like, oh, well, Rory's the Midnight Motorist kid, but because he's a runaway. But we hear that Rory's parents, while a little neglectful, weren't bad parents. He had good parents. And meanwhile, you look at Midnight Motorist, and there's nothing healthy or functional about that family. It's a seemingly drunk, definitely abusive father, and a distant mother at best. So Rory doesn't line up with the Midnight Motorist kid very well, nor does he line up being the FNAF 4 player very well. So I don't think that Rory is our guy here. In fact, I don't think Rory exists in the games at all. I think this is Scott telling us without telling us, right? This is Scott being like, this is a method that is possible in this universe. Who was it done on in this universe? And that's the question we have to answer. So looking into it, we then go back to the two prime suspects, right? The crying child and Michael. Well, if it's the crying child, we have a lot of questions to answer. One, when is this happening, right? Is this happening post-bite and he's experimenting on the coma victim? It's possible, but I mean, in FNAF 4, you're moving around a lot. So unless this hallucinogenic gas is really strong, and it seems like the hallucinogenic gas, you need to, it doesn't go all the way there, right? You need something there for your mind to latch on to. So that seems unlikely. Now, there's the other option. Did this happen pre-bite? And this then explains why the crying child is so afraid, right? The Fredbear plushie, which I believe is being spoken through by William, since in sister location, we see a Fredbear plushie with what looks like a walkie-talkie. The Fredbear plushie at one point goes, remember what you saw, run away. If William is conducting these experiments on the crying child, that would track, right? Being like, I'm teaching you to be afraid of these animatronics, partially because they're dangerous. And I'm doing this in a very fucked up manner, but it seems plausible. The problem, I think there's an inherent problem with this theory, though. And that's mainly, like, it's threefold. One, why? What is the purpose? At this point in the timeline, why would William be going to this much of an extreme to experiment on something, right? Like, I'm not saying, like, William Afton would be a good father at this point in the timeline. I don't think William Afton was ever a good father, nor do I think he ever cared about his children. But I don't think, it seems excessive for no reason at this point in the timeline. But further than that, the crying child needs to get bit at Fredbear's family diner. To do that, he needs to be walking around during the day outside. Theoretically, this testing chamber, you're stuck here permanently. And even if you're technically not, it seems unlikely that William Afton would wait until his child is asleep and then, while he's asleep, very carefully pick him up, bring him down a bunker, put him into a testing facility, test on him, and then when the testing is done, carefully pick him back up and bring him back upstairs every night. Like, that feels weird, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Unless he was in there for a few years and then let out, but that's also strange and presents a lot of problems. Like, wouldn't Michael notice his brother's gone? So then the other option goes, well, what about Michael? And I think this is a lot more likely. The questions do then come up, when and for how long? Now, if we assume this is taking place, because, okay, so if the crying child is still wandering around during the day and Michael is teasing him, once again, he's not in the chamber at this moment. So it makes a lot more sense, I believe, for this to happen after the bite, right? Once the crying child is out of the way, presumably Elizabeth may or may not already be dead, or she dies later, Michael is a much easier target now. And now we have multiple things to think about. One, if we can create someone as afraid of the animatronics that the crying child was, maybe we can learn more about his psyche, and maybe we can find a way to experiment on bringing him back, Or this could also be partially retribution. One, I want to learn more about the human psyche. Two, I do want to punish you for killing your brother. Again, I'm not saying this is William Afton caring about his children. If he cared about his children, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. Not only that, but even if one of your children leads to the accidental death of another, this is too much, right? It'd be one thing to disown your son or whatever, but to forever torment him in the nightmare chambers, you don't do that to someone you care about. I always got to specify that, because I feel like whenever I talk about William doing this to Mike as retribution, some people misconstrue that as me saying William cared about the crying child. I don't think so. At least not as a son. Maybe as an asset at best. So all this to say, those are like the two, I feel, main theories going into FNAF 4. That being nightmares, that being gas experiments. So what do I think about FNAF 4? Like many of my theories, it's needlessly complicated, but I think it gives the most conclusive and evidentiarily backed answer. So I think it's a mixture of multiple of these options. Let's walk through it. I think the crying child was having nightmares akin to what we see in FNAF 4. Maybe not exactly, but similar. And I think he was telling them to his Fredbear plushie, the thing he considers his best friend. The Fredbear plushie that goes directly to William Afton. So this is already a thing, and William would learn about the nightmares that the crying child is having. And he would use that to manipulate the crying child. But then eventually, the crying child gets bitten and later dies because of Michael's teasing. So after this, William begins these experiments. He's already in the sister location bunker. Even if sister location isn't around yet, I think this bunker is. And he builds the FNAF 4 chambers. He builds the experiments we see in the private office of sister location. And he then throws Michael into them. 1, retribution. You ruined my asset. I will condition you to obey. 2, I do think it's some sort of experiment to learn about people and how to manipulate them or how to use them more effectively. But notably, I don't think we've seen FNAF 4 the game yet up until this point. I have a whole video, and if I remember, I'll link it right here, about how I think Michael Afton is an unwilling servant to William throughout the timeline. And I think this is how he gets him there. He tortures him with his chamber for a long time until eventually he needs someone who can get into a Fazbear restaurant unsuspiciously. And then he pulls Michael out. He's now compliant. This happens a few times until sister location, to which Michael doesn't come back. He, in fact, dies and then is reborn, somehow possessing himself. I think this also explains how, Michael is not very good at things, but Michael Afton is really, really good at playing Five Nights at Freddy's. He survives FNAF 1, FNAF 2, theoretically, FNAF 3, FNAF 6, but he's really bad at basic tasks like following up on things and taking apart animatronics. I think this unironically lends credence to this theory that all he's done for the majority of his his teen to adult life is play FNAF 4. That's all he's done. That's all he knows. But here's the thing. I don't think that's FNAF 4 either. What I think FNAF 4 is after sister location, he is now dead, but now alive again, and he's never put back in those chambers again. But ever since then, he has recurring nightmares of those experiments. That is what I think FNAF 4 is. I think FNAF 4 is the recurring nightmares of Michael Afton, based upon the experiments his father put him through. Those experiments were based upon the crying child's nightmares. I think it's one of those Russian nesting dolls of nightmare experiment. Like I said, is that convoluted? Yes. But I think it gives us a very conclusive and evidentiarily backed narrative for FNAF 4. At least for the night gameplay. The day mini games, I do think, are things that happened. There is an argument to be made that is the part of the experiments that wander throughout the day. But then, like, why are we the crying child? Unless that's even more torture for Michael, I'm not sure. But those are my thoughts. And I guess, I don't know. I took like a 5-minute break maybe to get water. So either we're at like 20 minutes or we're at like 27 minutes. I have no idea. But I think we're going to move on to questions. This is obviously not going to be like a 45, 50-minute podcast. But if you want your questions answered on the podcast, you can send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description. You can copy and paste it because it's a pain to type. You can also answer these on Spotify. I think I'm like super behind on Spotify upload, so I might just upload them all tomorrow. So if you're on Spotify or any other associated platform, sorry, you're getting them all today. So I keep getting this comment, and I should address it, where people are like, hey, the past couple episodes are not on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Amazon Music or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's not a copyright thing. It's not a processing thing. I just have a bad memory, and it's something that I need to do extra, and I forget to do it. So I apologize. But anyway, our first question comes from Ven, she, they. In FNAF 4, the crying child, on topic here, the crying child has plushies of the Core 4 and Fredbear. He refers to them as his friends. I've noticed that he doesn't have a golden Bonnie plush. Is it possible that the crying child saw William in the Springbonnie suit kill a child? Could this be why crying child has a fear of animatronics and why Fredbear says, remember what you saw? Thank you for your question. I think that's really interesting because we have to think about the timeline of events here. Theoretically, William Afton only kills children in the Springbonnie suit 5 times. And at least up until FNAF 2. DCI, we don't have details on, but that's up for debate. And that being the missing child incident, right? Where there were 2 children that go missing and then 3 more are reported missing. Whether that was all at one event, it's hard to say. But you have to think about, does this happen before the crying child is bit? I tend to think no, because I don't see a good narrative reason for it to happen. That being said, William's a psychopath. Maybe he just does it because, and that would then explain why there's a rumor that people go missing at night, right? I don't know. I don't see good evidence for it, especially for the crying child to see it happen. I think that's a big claim for small evidence. However, I do think you raise a good point. It's very notable that he has every plushie except for Springbonnie, which seems strange, especially because we know Springbonnie is merch at this point. That one kid has one. Meanwhile, the crying child has the main 4 and Fredbear, no Springbonnie. So it's worthwhile to mention. I think that's possible. I would want stronger evidence because theoretically, if the crying child saw William kill a child in the Springbonnie suit, that would confirm the missing child incident to happen before the crying child is bit. And that's a big shakeup. It's definitely interesting to think about, and it's worthwhile to bring up. I'm not sure where I land on that yet, but I thank you for your question, Ben. Our next question comes from Crazy Little Adventure, they, them. Could it be possible that since RXQ is modeled after Toy Bonnie, that they were created by the agony of the dead child incident, and that Shadow Freddy could be from the agony of the missing child incident? I mean, your pacifist versus aggressor theory could even work if the DCI doesn't end up possessing the toys. The MCI possessed their suits, so Shadow Freddy is aggressive, and the DCI probably didn't possess their suits, so Shadow Bonnie isn't as aggressive. Thank you for your question. That's a really interesting interpretation I hadn't considered, because like I've mentioned in the past, my main thinking for Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie is that they are agony reflections of Cassidy and Charlotte. And as much as everything I think lines up for that, like the moves they have, the way they act, how they're represented in FNAF world, where they appear. Like, I think all of that lines up really well, except for the fact that Shadow Bonnie is a toy Bonnie. If it was a shadow puppet, this would be an open and shut case. But it is Shadow Toy Bonnie. And that's something I've never been able to explain. So I like your idea here that these are not one person's agony, but a collection of an event of agony. That being the missing child incident and the dead child incident. For those of you who are lost there, the missing child incident is the 5 kids that were killed in a Freddy's. The dead child incident is a term colloquially used to refer to the children killed in the FNAF 2 location, again, presumably by William Afton. This is referred to as the dead child incident because they're not missing. In Save Them, there are bodies strewn all about the FNAF 2 restaurant. So these are new bodies that are not stuffed into suits and presumably did not go missing. But then the question becomes, do the dead child incident kids possess anything? I don't think so, because theoretically this happens near the end of FNAF 2 and they're already acting aggressive night 1. So I believe, I'm more inclined to believe that the MCI souls kind of leaked into the toy animatronics via using parts from the withered animatronics. But neither here nor there. The important thing is, there's definitely agony in both of these events. So I do kind of fuck with the idea that Shadow Freddy, this Gen 1 Freddy, is representative of the agony of those Gen 1 murders. And then Toy Bonnie, Shadow Bonnie, or RXQ, being representative of these new gen murders. I actually like that a lot. I might stick to that going forward. I can't think of any compelling counter evidence to that. And it gives a satisfying answer for why it's Toy Bonnie and not regular Bonnie, you know? Other than just, that's the model Scott was currently working with. Yeah, I think I was just going to stick with that. I like that a lot. Thank you for your thank you for your question/suggestion. Creates a little adventure. It's a great idea. Moving on to our last question. Hopefully this gets at least longer than the main channel video this week, because the main channel video this week is long. For those of you who are curious, I guess if you've stuck around this long through Sick Voice, you deserve a little teaser. This week's video is on Golden Freddy, because everyone and their mother has been making a Golden Freddy video after the dual process timeline. Reasonably so, because there's a lot of things that have been shooken up in the fandom. A little hint towards mine, I don't think the crying child is in Golden Freddy at all. There's your teaser for this week's video. It's going to be a bit of a spicy one. Anyway, our last question comes from PM, him. What is exactly your opinion on the theory that Vanny can exist as an entity of its own? I've gone over this a couple times, but I think it's worthwhile to talk about here, where I can kind of slow it down and break down the argument, right? And this kind of combines someone else's, I forget who, somebody else asked, like, if Vanny is separate, what about Dr. Rabbit? And yes, I agree. So in B7-2, bit of backstory. In B7, there's a kid named Billy who watches a lot of animatronic shows and begins to think he's an animatronic and starts modifying his body with animatronic parts to become an animatronic. And then he realizes, wait, I'm not an animatronic, and tries to kill himself in a a car compactor. Well, B7-2 happens. He's been rescued. All of the animatronic parts came off in one piece and has like locked in a cell somewhere. But it's revealed that even though Billy is back to being human and his old self, those animatronic pieces formed into B7, that identity he had adopted, that mentality, that persona. And it seems like it can exist outside of him, but it does need a new host. And by the end of the story, his grandmother, knowing that this was happening, accepts B7 as a host, and then she dies, killing B7. She's like, I was going to die anyway. This, I can at least free you from B7, and dies, killing B7. So what this book is kind of implying is that if a consciousness is born within someone's mind, it can be removed and exist on its own, though it will seek a new host. Only by killing its host while it is in its host can you destroy the persona. So then that brings the question of Vanny and GGY, or Dr. Rabbit. I don't know. I think I prefer GGY only because it refers to Gregory's name, and it's quicker. It's quicker to understand. But I understand Dr. Rabbit I think Dr. Rabbit is an objectively cooler name, but GGY is a more easily understood name. But in the books, Gregory is under the effects of Glitch Trap, going by Dr. Rabbit and putting GGY in all the arcade machines and in the codes of the animatronics. But the idea is like, if a consciousness can exist without its host, Vanessa is freed in 2 of the endings of Security Breach, and Gregory is seemingly freed at the beginning of Security Breach. So the question becomes, can these entities exist on their own? I think so. I think Vanny and GGY are now floating consciousnesses looking for new hosts. In fact, that might be what we're seeing in the Mimic and Helpy in Ruin, right? Because, I mean, the Mimic is acting as Gregory, but maybe part of that is from GGY. Maybe that's where he learned these mannerisms. And then I still do think that Helpy and the Mimic are 2 different entities because of that argument they have about halfway through. So what is Helpy? Is it just Glitch Trap? Well, maybe. Or maybe it's Vanny. After all, Cassie sees Helpy when she puts on the Vanny mask. That makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure. It's something that I think we have not seen the last of these personas. I think they're finding new hosts. Maybe we'll see that in the next game. But that's my thoughts on that. But once again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, you can send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That's in the description to copy and paste because it's pain to type. I'm getting quieter because I'm fading. I can feel my throat screaming, please stop. We're at 43 minutes on the recording. Hopefully, it's at least 38 minutes of a podcast. I assume you understand why this is a shorter podcast. I just hope it's longer than this week's main channel video, because if not, that'll be really funny. I'll find out. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.